Mall guard finds delinquent intruder during the night, but when he discovers who she is, he's paralyzed.
Hello and welcome to 80s Love Stories, where I, your favorite narrator, Christopher, bring you an exciting love story straight from the unforgettable 1980s. Get ready for a journey full of nostalgia and incredible twists. Today's story is truly remarkable, with an ending that's sure to touch your heart and leave you amazed. So, stay with me until the very last moment. I hope this experience is unforgettable for you, and may God bless you and your family. Now, let's get started. The fluorescent lights hummed softly overhead as James Parker made his final round through the empty corridors of Starcrest Mall. His footsteps echoed against the polished tiles, mixing with the distant whir of the cleaning machines 2 floors below. It was 11:45 p.m. on a warm June night in 1985, and like every other night for the past 8 months, the 21-year-old security guard expected nothing but silence and solitude. The mall's night shift suited him perfectly. While his friends partied at college or worked typical 9-to-5 jobs, James found peace in these quiet hours. His uniform, though a size too large, made him feel important, even if his only audience was the mannequins in store windows and that ridiculous bronze statue in the central court. Ah, the statue, standing 3 stories tall. The spirit of American enterprise dominated the mall's heart, its polished surface reflecting the neon signs of closed shops. James always thought it looked out of place, a stern-faced businessman in a suit, holding a briefcase in one hand and pointing toward the sky with the other. Kids called it the boring man behind their parents' backs, and James couldn't blame them. He checked his watch, analog, so a gift from his father when he landed this job, and decided to make one last pass by the fountain court before retreating to the security office for his midnight coffee break. The sound of running water usually helped clear his mind, especially on nights when the emptiness felt a bit too empty. That's when he heard it, a soft, metallic scraping sound coming from the central court. James froze, his hand instinctively moving to the flashlight on his belt. In 8 months, he'd dealt with nothing worse than a couple of teenagers trying to sneak into the arcade after hours, and one very confused raccoon that had somehow made its way inside through the loading dock. The scraping continued, followed by what sounded like spray paint being shaken. "Hey," he called out, unclipping his flashlight. "Security! Whoever's there, show yourself!" The sounds stopped abruptly. As James rounded the corner into the central court, his beam caught a flash of movement. Someone in a black hoodie ducking behind the statue's base. A backpack lay open nearby, surrounded by spray paint cans and what looked like climbing gear. "Come out slowly with your hands where I can see them," James announced, trying to sound more authoritative than he felt. His heart pounded against his ribs as he approached the statue. A figure emerged from behind the base, hands raised. The hood fell back, revealing a girl about his age with wild, dark hair streaked with a single stripe of electric blue. Her face was a mixture of defiance and fear, highlighted by the mall's ambient lighting and the red exit signs. "Look," she said, her voice steady despite the situation. "I know this looks bad, but you don't understand what this statue represents." James kept his flashlight trained on her, but noticed something unusual. Unlike typical vandals, she wasn't trying to run. Instead, she stood her ground, her dark eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him uncomfortable. "I understand it represents about 6 months' salary for me if anything happens to it," he replied, moving closer. "What's your name?" She hesitated, then lifted her chin slightly. Rachel Thompson." The name hit James like a physical force. Thompson, as in Thompson's Records, the beloved local shop that had closed down last year. He'd spent countless afternoons there during high school, flipping through vinyl collections and listening to recommendations from the passionate owner, Mr. Thompson. "You're David Thompson's daughter," he said, lowering his flashlight slightly. Something flickered across her face, surprising perhaps, that he knew her father. "Then maybe you'll understand why this monument to corporate greed needs to come down." She gestured at the statue with barely contained anger. "Do you know who commissioned this thing? Gerald Maxwell, the same man who orchestrated the mall expansion that forced out all the small businesses on Cedar Street, including my dad's shop." James looked at the spray paint cans scattered around the statue's base. The closest one was hot pink, an odd choice for vandalism. Then he noticed the sophisticated climbing gear and what appeared to be a camera bag half hidden behind her backpack. This wasn't just random vandalism. She had a plan. "Whatever you're trying to prove," and he said, "this isn't the way to do it." Rachel's expression softened slightly, and for the first time, James noticed how tired she looked. Not just physically tired, but worn down in a deeper way. "Maybe not," she admitted. "But someone needs to expose the truth about Maxwell and what he did to my father, to all those business owners." James knew he should call the police. It was protocol. Instead, he found himself asking, "What truth?" Rachel glanced at her watch, a vintage Casio digital that somehow perfectly matched her rebel artist vibe. "I can show you," she said, "but not here. There are cameras." "I know where the cameras are," James replied before he could stop himself. "Yes, and I know where they're not." He was breaking every rule in the security handbook, but something about Rachel's determination, mixed with the late-hour surreality of the situation, made him curious. Plus, he remembered how Mr. Thompson had always slipped him extra discount coupons and recommended obscure bands that became his favorites. "5 minutes," he said firmly. "Show me what you've got, and then you need to leave before my supervisor does his midnight check-in." Rachel quickly gathered her supplies, stuffing them into her backpack with practiced efficiency. As she moved, James caught the scent of paint and something else, maybe vanilla, and found himself noticing how gracefully she moved despite her chunky combat boots. "Follow me," he said, leading her toward the service corridor behind the orange Julius. "But just so we're clear, if you try anything, I still have to report this." She fell into step beside him, her boots surprisingly quiet on the tile floor. "Fair enough. But after you see what I've found, you might want to help me instead." James couldn't help but smile slightly at her confidence. As they walked through the darkened corridor, the only sound was the distant hum of the building's air conditioning and their footsteps echoing in perfect synchronization. Neither of them realized it then, but that moment, a security guard and a would-be vandal walking through an empty mall at midnight, was the beginning of something much bigger than either of them had planned. And that statue, standing stern and tall in the central court, held secrets that would change both their lives forever. James led Rachel to the mall's defunct Radio Shack, closed for renovations. The store's darkened interior, filled with displays of Tandy computers and blank cassettes, seemed frozen in time. He unlocked the security gate with practiced ease, glancing over his shoulder out of habit. "The cameras in this section are down for maintenance," he explained, switching on his flashlight. "We have exactly 20 minutes before my supervisor calls for check-in." Rachel pulled a worn manila envelope from her backpack, her hands trembling slightly with what James suspected was more excitement than fear. The sleeve of her oversized hoodie slid back, revealing a collection of colorful rubber bracelets and a friendship bracelet that looked handmade. "First, you need to see these," she said, spreading several photographs across an empty display counter. The images, slightly faded and dated 1979, showed the old Cedar Street before the mall's expansion. Thompson's record stood proudly in the center, its neon sign glowing even in the daytime shot. "This was our life. Dad built that store from nothing." James picked up one of the photos, remembering the warmth of the shop, the way vinyl records were arranged by mood rather than just genre, and how Mr. Thompson always seemed to know exactly what album would fix whatever was troubling his customers. "I remember," he said softly. "Your dad once recommended a Tears for Fears album when I was having a rough time, said music heals better than anything else." Rachel's expression softened momentarily. "You really were a customer." She moved closer to look at the photo he was holding, her shoulder brushing against his. The scent of vanilla was stronger now, her shampoo maybe. "Every Friday after school," James replied, suddenly very aware of how close she was standing. "Saved up my allowance for those import singles he kept behind the counter." She smiled for the first time that night, a genuine expression that transformed her whole face. The British imports. Dad always said only true music lovers appreciated those. The moment hung between them, warm and unexpected, before Rachel seemed to remember her mission. She pulled out more documents, property records, newspaper clippings, and what looked like financial statements. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a highlighted section. "Maxwell didn't just buy out the properties. he orchestrated a whole campaign to drive down their value. Anonymous complaints to the health department, sudden building code violations, even paying teens to loiter and drive away customers. James frowned, studying the papers. His flashlight beam revealed a complex web of shell companies and suspicious transactions. "How did you get these?" "Remember Jenny? She used to work at the record store." Rachel pulled out another document. "She's a clerk at the county records office now. She's the one who noticed the pattern." A sudden noise from the corridor made them both freeze. James quickly switched off his flashlight, instinctively stepping in front of Rachel. They stood in tense silence as the sound of the cleaning crew passed by, the whir of their buffer fading into the distance. In the darkness, James was acutely aware of Rachel's presence behind him, her breath warm against his shoulder. When he turned to face her, the glow from the exit sign caught her profile, and for a moment he forgot they were investigating corporate fraud. "We should move," he whispered. "My supervisor will be calling soon." Rachel nodded, gathering the documents with quick, practiced movements. As she reached for the last photo, their hands brushed. Both pulled back quickly, but the contact left an electric tension in the air. "That statue," Rachel said, her voice slightly unsteady. "It's hollow inside. There's a maintenance panel at the base. I think there might be more documents inside it." "Inside the statue?" James checked his watch. 10 minutes until check-in. Why would anyone hide documents there? Because Maxwell supervised its installation personally, insisted on special contractors, wouldn't let the regular maintenance crew near it. She zipped up her backpack, then hesitated. "Look, I know this sounds crazy, but when's the last time anyone checked that maintenance panel?" James interrupted, an idea forming. "According to the mall records Jenny found, not since installation in '82. James ran a hand through his hair, knowing he was about to cross a line in his security duties. "Tomorrow night, I can get us into the maintenance corridors behind the central court, but we'll need better equipment than spray paint." Rachel's eyes lit up. "I have everything we need. But why are you helping me?" James thought about Mr. Thompson, about the way the old record store had been a sanctuary for so many kids like him. He thought about his father's words when he took this job. Sometimes doing what's right isn't the same as following all the rules. But mostly, he thought about the way Rachel's eyes sparked when she talked about justice, and how her presence made the empty mall feel less lonely. "Because," he said carefully, "your dad helped a lot of people, including me. And because this doesn't feel like vandalism anymore, it feels like uncovering the truth." The sudden crackle of his radio made them both jump. "Parker, check in. Over." Rachel quickly shouldered her backpack while James answered the call. "Parker here. All clear in Sector 4. Over." "Roger that. Continue your rounds." As James led Rachel toward the service exit, she paused. "Same time tomorrow night?" He knew he should say no. This could cost him his job, maybe even lead to criminal charges, but watching her stand there, backlit by the exit sign's glow, her dark hair falling over one eye, he found himself nodding. "Meet me behind the arcade at midnight." "And Rachel?" He hesitated. Maybe leave the spray paint at home this time. She grinned, a mischievous expression that made his heart skip. "What? Not a fan of hot pink?" Before he could respond, she slipped through the door and disappeared into the night, leaving James standing in the empty corridor, already counting the hours until tomorrow's shift. As he resumed his rounds, passing the now silent statue in the central court, James couldn't shake the feeling that his life had just taken an unexpected turn. The evidence in Rachel's envelope, the mystery of the statue, and most disturbingly, the way his pulse quickened when she smiled. It all pointed to a summer that would be anything but ordinary. The statue loomed above him, its stern face seemingly mocking his predicament. But for the first time since taking this job, James looked forward to the night shift. After all, he had a mystery to solve, and maybe, just maybe, a girl to figure out as well. The following night, James arrived early for his shift, his mind racing with possibilities. He'd spent his entire day at the public library, researching Gerald Maxwell and the mall's construction. The microfiche reader had given him a headache, But he'd found interesting details about protests during the mall's expansion, protests that mysteriously disappeared from the local papers overnight. The mall felt different now. Every shadow held potential secrets, and even the muzak playing softly through the speakers, Lionel Richie's Hello, seemed to carry hidden meaning. He changed into his uniform quickly, careful to add the small flashlight he'd bought at Radio Shack during his lunch break. His regular duty flashlight would be too conspicuous for tonight's investigation. At 11:55 p.m., James made his way to the arcade. The place was eerily silent, the machines covered in dust cloths like sleeping giants. Only the Pac-Man cabinet remained uncovered, its demo screen casting a bluish glow across the floor. He'd chosen this meeting spot carefully. The arcade's back entrance connected to a service corridor that would lead them directly behind the central court. Rachel appeared exactly at midnight, slipping through the door like a shadow. She'd traded her hoodie for a dark denim jacket covered in patches, bands like The Clash and The Cure, along with what looked like hand-painted designs. Her hair was pulled back tonight, making her look older, more serious. "Hi," she whispered, and James realized he'd been staring. "Hi," he managed, then quickly added, "Did you bring the equipment?" She patted her backpack. "Everything we need. But first," she pulled out a Walkman and held out one of the headphones. "I made you something." James took the offered headphone, trying to ignore the way his fingers tingled when they brushed against hers. The opening notes of the Smiths' How Soon Is Now filled his ear. "A mixtape?" he asked, surprised by the gesture. Rachel shrugged, but he caught the slight blush on her cheeks. "For helping me. Plus, every good mission needs a soundtrack." Before James could respond, the distant sound of the cleaning crew's buffer reminded them of their task. They made their way through the service corridor, moving carefully in the dim emergency lighting. James led them through a maze of maintenance passages, past the humming electrical room and the staff break room where a forgotten MTV still played silently on the wall-mounted TV. The back access to the central court was hidden behind a panel marked Electrical Services. James unlocked it with his master key, revealing the hollow space behind the massive statue. "Ready?" he whispered. Rachel nodded, already pulling equipment from her bag. A compact camera, a small pry bar, and most surprisingly, a set of professional lockpicks. "Where did you learn to—" James started. "My uncle's a locksmith," she explained quickly. "He taught me when I was younger. Before you ask, yes, he'd be horrified to know I'm using his lessons like this." They worked in silence, Rachel handling the delicate work of opening the maintenance panel while James kept watch. The air was thick with dust and anticipation. Every small noise made them freeze, but the cleaning crew stayed distant, their buffer creating perfect cover. The panel finally came loose with a soft click. Rachel aimed her flashlight inside, revealing a space about 2 feet square. Papers were indeed stacked there, along with what looked like a small safe. "Jackpot," Rachel breathed, reaching in. That's when they heard the footsteps. James reacted instantly, pulling Rachel into the shadows behind a column. They pressed against the wall, barely breathing, as the beam of a security flashlight swept past their hiding spot. "Evening check complete in Central Court," came the voice of Mike, James's supervisor. "Moving to Sector 6. They waited until the footsteps faded completely before letting out their held breath. James suddenly realized how close Rachel was, her back pressed against his chest, her heart beating so hard he could feel it. The scent of vanilla was overwhelming. "That was close," she whispered, turning to face him, but not stepping away. "Too close," he agreed, but made no move to put distance between them either. For a moment they stood frozen in that position, the only sound the distant hum of the air conditioning and their gradually steadying breath. James found himself noticing details he shouldn't, the small scar above her right eyebrow, the way her eyes caught the neon light from the closed stores, how her lips parted slightly, as if she wanted to say something more. The spell broke when the mall's PA system crackled to life with its hourly automated announcement about store hours. They jumped apart, both laughing nervously. "We should—" James gestured toward the statue. "Right. Yes, the documents." They returned to their task, Rachel photographing everything before removing it from the hidden compartment. The safe proved more challenging. It was a small combination model, probably from the early 80s. "We'll need time to crack this," Rachel said, carefully placing it in her backpack. "But look at these." She handed James a stack of letters. The correspondence, dated 1981-82, detailed Maxwell's systematic destruction of Cedar Street's businesses. Worse, it implicated several city officials in what appeared to be a complex web of bribes and threats. "This is bigger than we thought," James said, scanning the documents. "Tire these officials. Some of them are still in office." Rachel's face was a mix of vindication and worry. "Now you understand why I couldn't just go to the police. Maxwell owns half this town." A sudden crash from above made them both look up. The cleaning crew had dropped something on the upper level. "We need to move," James said, helping Rachel repack her bag. "My shift partner comes on at 2 a.m. As they hurried back through the service corridor, James's mind raced. The evidence they'd found was explosive, career-ending for several prominent figures, but more pressing was his growing awareness of Rachel's presence beside him. The way her hand had brushed his as they gathered the documents, how she'd felt pressed against him in the darkness. They emerged behind the arcade, where they'd started. The Pac-Man machine still glowed, its repetitive melody a stark contrast to their racing hearts. "Tomorrow night?" Rachel asked, adjusting her backpack. "I know a place where we can examine everything properly. The old drive-in theater on Route 9. It's abandoned, but the projection booth is still accessible. Nobody ever goes there anymore." James knew he should say no. Every security protocol, every common-sense rule said to walk away now. Instead, he found himself saying, "I get off at 6 a.m., meet me there at sunset." Rachel's smile made his heart skip. She started to leave, then turned back suddenly. "Keep the mixtape. Side B has some special selections." Before he could respond, she was gone, disappearing into the pre-dawn darkness. James stood there for a moment, touching the Walkman in his pocket. The magnitude of what they'd discovered should have been his primary concern. Instead, he found himself wondering what songs she'd chosen for Side B, and why his chest felt tight every time she smiled. As he resumed his rounds, passing the now-closed maintenance panel of the statue, James realized he was in deeper than he'd ever planned, in more ways than one. The abandoned Route 9 drive-in looked like a forgotten film set as James pulled up in his father's borrowed Pontiac Firebird. The setting sun painted the huge blank screen in shades of orange and pink, while tall grass swayed between the rows of empty speaker posts. The concession stand's faded "refreshments" sign hung crooked, a relic of better days. Rachel's yellow Volkswagen Beetle was already parked near the projection booth, its paint job chipped but cheerful. She sat on the hood, wearing an oversized Tears for Fears concert t-shirt over faded jeans, her feet tapping to music from a portable boombox. "You're late," she called out, but her smile took any sting from the words. "Had to convince my dad to lend me the car," James replied, trying not to notice how the sunset made her hair glow. "He thinks I'm taking Jenny from the record store to the movies." Something flickered across Rachel's face. Disappointment, but it passed quickly. Jenny would never be caught dead in a Firebird. She's strictly a BMW girl now. They made their way to the projection booth, Rachel leading with a borrowed key, don't ask, and set up their impromptu investigation headquarters. The small room still contained an ancient film projector, while posters for E.T. and The Breakfast Club peeled from the walls. Rachel spread the documents across a dusty counter, while James set up the battery-powered lamp he'd brought. The safe sat between them, still stubbornly locked. "Look at this," Rachel said, pointing to a letter. "Maxwell didn't just target my dad's store. He systematically destroyed every business that refused to sell. The health code violations, the vandalism. It was all orchestrated." James leaned closer, their shoulders touching as they read. The contact sent a current through him that had nothing to do with their investigation. "The dates match the newspaper articles I found," he said, pulling out his own research. "Every time a business got cited, their protest coverage disappeared from the papers the next day. Classic Maxwell," Rachel muttered. "Buy what you can, bury what you can't." They worked through the evidence as darkness fell, connecting dates and names, building a timeline of corruption. The portable radio played quietly in the background. Wang Chung, then Cyndi Lauper, Then a slow song by REO Speedwagon that made them both suddenly aware of their proximity in the small booth. "We should take a break," James suggested, his voice rougher than he intended. "There's a Dairy Queen still open on Main." Rachel's eyes lit up. "Ice cream sounds perfect, but—" she gestured at the documents. "We'll take them with us. Better than leaving them here." The Dairy Queen was a neon oasis in the growing darkness. They sat outside at a metal table, sharing a banana split while reviewing photos of the evidence. Rachel had a spot of chocolate sauce on her chin that James desperately wanted to wipe away. "If we can crack that safe," Rachel said, licking her spoon, "I bet we'll find the smoking gun." Maxwell was too careful to keep everything in one place, but she stopped abruptly, her eyes fixed on something over James's shoulder. He turned to see a black Mercedes crawling past the parking lot, its driver paying far too much attention to their table. "Inside, now!" James grabbed their papers while Rachel snatched up her backpack. They hurried through the Dairy Queen's back door, just as the Mercedes made another pass. "Friend of yours?" James asked as they peered through the window. "Maxwell's head of security," Rachel said grimly. "He's been following me since I started asking questions at City Hall." James felt his stomach tighten. Until now, their investigation had felt almost like a game. Thrilling, but somehow unreal. The Mercedes changed that. They slipped out through the kitchen, the teenage staff too busy with the dinner rush to notice. James led them through a series of alleyways until they emerged behind the old movie theater, its marquee advertising "Back to the Future" in slightly crooked letters. "We can't go back to the drive-in," Rachel said, still clutching her backpack. "They might be watching it now." "I know a place," James replied, "but we'll have to wait until my shift tonight." Rachel raised an eyebrow. "Another secure location in the mall." "Better, the old fallout shelter in the basement. It's not even on the modern blueprints. I found it during maintenance training. No cameras, no patrols, and the only key—" He pulled out his master ring. "Happens to work on locks from that era." Rachel stared at him for a long moment, then broke into a grin. "James Parker, you continue to surprise me." A car horn made them both jump. The Mercedes was back, turning onto their street. "Run?" Rachel suggested. "Run," James agreed. They sprinted through the gathering darkness, Rachel leading them down a narrow passage between buildings. The sound of their footsteps echoed off brick walls, mixing with their laughter and the distant rumble of the Mercedes. They emerged onto Mason Street, just as the local record shop was closing. The owner, an old friend of Rachel's father, took one look at their flushed faces and ushered them inside, flipping the closed sign behind them. In the safety of the shop, surrounded by rows of vinyl and the lingering scent of incense, they caught their breath. Rachel collapsed onto a worn couch, while James leaned against a display of new releases, his heart racing from more than just their escape. "That was close," Rachel said, pushing her hair back from her face. "Too close," James agreed, but he was smiling. "Your life is definitely more exciting than night security." Speaking of which, Rachel checked her watch, a Mickey Mouse model that somehow made her look both younger and impossibly cool. "Your shift starts in 2 hours. Meet me at midnight. The loading dock has a blind spot in the camera coverage between 11:55 and 12:05. Rachel stood, adjusting her t-shirt where it had slipped off one shoulder. "It's a date," she said, then quickly added, "I mean, not a date, just—" "I know what you mean," James said softly, even as his heart did a complicated flip. As they parted ways outside the record shop, the summer night heavy with humidity and possibility, James realized two things. They were definitely being watched now, and he was definitely falling for Rachel Thompson. Both revelations should have terrified him. Instead, watching her wave from her yellow Beetle as she drove away, he felt more alive than he had in years. The Mercedes was nowhere in sight, but James took a circuitous route home anyway. He had 2 hours to change for his shift and figure out how to protect both their investigation and his growing feelings for a girl who was supposed to be nothing more than a vandal. The mixtape she'd given him was still in his Walkman. He put it on as he walked, and the opening notes of The Cure's Just Like Heaven seemed to perfectly capture the strange mix of danger and romance that his summer had become. The service elevator groaned as it descended into the mall's basement level, its ancient mechanism protesting every floor. James stood close to Rachel in the dim emergency lighting, acutely aware of her presence. She'd traded her usual rebel outfit for all black, including a borrowed mall maintenance jacket he'd provided for cover. "How did you even find this shelter?" she whispered, as they reached the bottom. "Would you believe I was hiding from my supervisor after falling asleep during a shift?" James admitted, leading her through a maze of storage rooms. "Best mistake I ever made." The fallout shelter entrance was hidden behind stacks of Christmas decorations, artificial trees, and tangled strands of lights that hadn't seen daylight since the Carter administration. James shifted them aside with practiced ease, revealing a heavy metal door with faded civil defense markings. The key worked smoothly, despite years of disuse. Inside, the shelter was a time capsule, emergency rations, old radio equipment, and rows of metal bunks covered in dust. Their flashlight beams created dancing shadows on the concrete walls. "Perfect," Rachel said, setting up their makeshift workspace on a folding table. She pulled out the safe they'd recovered from the statue, along with a stack of papers they hadn't had time to examine earlier. James spread out his own findings, photocopies of building permits and newspaper clippings he'd gathered during his lunch breaks. Among them was a photo that caught Rachel's eye, her father's store on opening day, 1972. Mr. Thompson stood proudly in front, his arm around a much younger Rachel. "I remember that day," she said softly, touching the photo. "Dad let me arrange all the 45s in the front window. I organized them by color instead of alphabet, drove him crazy, but he left them that way for a week." James watched her face in the flashlight's glow, struck by the mixture of fondness and pain in her expression. Without thinking, he reached out and squeezed her hand. She didn't pull away. The moment was broken by a metallic sound from the safe. Something had shifted inside when Rachel set it down. They exchanged excited looks and got to work, Rachel applying her lockpicking skills, while James documented the positions of each tumbler click. "Have you thought about what happens after?" James asked as they worked. "Once we expose Maxwell." Rachel's hand stilled on the safe. "Honestly, no. I've been so focused on proving what he did, I haven't—" She bit her lip. "Dad's talking about moving us to California. Says there's nothing left for us here." The words hit James like a physical blow. Before he could respond, the safe's mechanism clicked and the door swung open. Inside was a single manila envelope and a small black notebook. Rachel's hands trembled as she opened the envelope, spilling photographs across the table. They showed Maxwell meeting with various city officials in suspicious locations, back alleys, empty parking lots, remote diners. "These are all from 1981, James noted, examining the timestamps, right when the mall expansion was being approved. "Look at this." Rachel opened the notebook. Account numbers, payment dates, names. Her eyes widened. "James, this isn't just about the mall. Maxwell was running a full protection racket across 3 counties. They pored over the evidence, pieces falling into place. Maxwell hadn't just forced out local businesses. He'd been systematically taking control of commercial properties across the region, using a combination of bribes, threats, and manufactured violations. "We need to copy everything," Rachel said, pulling out her camera. "If anything happens to these originals—" The sound of the service elevator engaging above made them freeze. "It's 2 a.m., James whispered. "Nobody should be down here." They quickly packed everything into Rachel's backpack. James led them to a secondary exit he'd discovered, a maintenance tunnel that connected to the mall's original foundation. As they crept through the narrow passage, voices echoed from the shelter entrance. James recognized one, Mike, his supervisor. The other was unfamiliar but authoritative. "Check everything," the unknown voice commanded. "Maxwell wants that safe found tonight." Rachel stumbled in the darkness, and James caught her, pulling her close against the tunnel wall. They stood perfectly still, barely breathing, as flashlight beams swept past the tunnel entrance they'd just left. In the tight space, James could feel Rachel's heart racing. Her face was inches from his, their breath mingling in the darkness. For a crazy moment, he thought about kissing her right there. Hiding from Maxwell's men in a forgotten tunnel beneath the mall, a crash from the shelter snapped them back to reality. They hurried through the tunnel, emerging finally in the mall's original boiler room. The space was tight, forcing them to press close together as James worked the locked door. "James," Rachel whispered, her voice unsteady. "Say if we get caught—" "We won't," he promised, though his own heart was thundering. The lock finally clicked open. They emerged into the brightly lit main basement, quickly straightening their clothes and trying to look casual. Just in time, Mike rounded the corner seconds later. "Parker?" He looked surprised, then suspicious. "What are you doing down here? And who's this?" "New maintenance trainee," James said smoothly. "Looking for a circuit breaker. The lights are flickering in Sector 4. Mike's eyes narrowed, focusing on Rachel's borrowed jacket. "ID." "Left it upstairs," Rachel replied, perfectly calm. "First day jitters," a voice called from the shelter area. "Nothing here. Place is clean." Mike's radio crackled. "Continue search of basement level." "You two, come with me," Mike ordered. Instead, Rachel grabbed James's hand and ran. They burst through the emergency exit, setting off alarms throughout the mall. The sound covered their footsteps as they sprinted through the parking lot, past empty cars gleaming under sodium lights. They didn't stop until they reached Rachel's Beetle, parked 3 blocks away. Laughing and gasping for breath, they collapsed against the car. "That was—" James started. "Amazing," Rachel finished, her eyes bright with adrenaline. They stared at each other, still high on danger and escape. The distant mall alarms mingled with crickets and the hum of streetlights. A car passed, its radio playing "Every Breath You Take Us" by the Police, the music floating through the summer night. "Rachel," James said softly, taking a step closer. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, everything else faded. Maxwell, the evidence, the pursuit, all of it disappeared in the way she looked at him. Then another car turned onto their street, a black Mercedes. "Get in!" Rachel yanked open the driver's door. James dove into the passenger seat as she started the engine. They peeled away from the curb, the Beetle's tires squealing in protest. As they drove through the sleeping town, evidence safely stowed in Rachel's backpack and heart still racing, James realized their investigation had just become a full-blown chase. But watching Rachel navigate the dark streets, determination set in every line of her face, he couldn't bring himself to regret any of it. The mixtape she'd given him had fallen from his pocket during their escape. Rachel popped it into the car's stereo, and Simple Minds' "I Don't You, Forget About Me" filled the small space between them. It felt like their own private soundtrack as they drove into the night, running from danger but maybe, just maybe, running towards something else as well. Dawn found James and Rachel at Sam's all-night diner, huddled in a corner booth beneath flickering fluorescent lights. Their coffee had gone cold, ignored in favor of the evidence spread discreetly between their plates of untouched waffles. The jukebox played Bonnie Tyler's "Total Eclipse of the Heart," softly in the background. "They'll be watching the mall now," James said, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "And my job?" He trailed off, knowing he'd never be able to explain running from his supervisor. Rachel reached across the table, her fingers brushing his. "I'm sorry. I never meant to cost you your job." "Hey!" He caught her hand before she could pull away. "This is bigger than a security job." The morning waitress refilled their cups, her beehive hairdo and cat-eye glasses straight out of a different era. Neither James nor Rachel moved to separate their hands. "We need to make copies," Rachel said once the waitress left. "Multiple sets, hidden in different locations. The originals, too. We can't risk keeping everything together." James nodded, thinking, "I know a place. Remember Tony from the mall's print shop? The guy who always wore Def Leppard shirts. He owns his own copy store now, over on Maple. Opens early, doesn't ask questions." James checked his watch. His father's Timex, the face scratched from their tunnel escape. "Should be open in an hour." They paid their bill and stepped into the morning sunshine. The streets were beginning to fill with early commuters, their cars gleaming with dew. Rachel's yellow Beetle stood out like a sunflower among the sedans and station wagons. As they approached the car, a familiar black Mercedes rolled past the diner. "Down!" James pulled Rachel behind a newspaper stand. They crouched together, hearts pounding, as the car cruised by. Through the tinted windows, James caught a glimpse of Maxwell himself in the back seat. "He's getting desperate," Rachel whispered. Her face was inches from his, close enough that he could see golden flecks in her brown eyes. "Coming out personally instead of sending his guys." The Mercedes turned the corner, and they quickly climbed into the Beetle. Rachel took a circuitous route to the copy shop, doubling back several times to ensure they weren't followed. Tony's shop was wedged between a video rental store and a shuttered arcade. The windows advertised Copies 5C in faded letters, while a neon open sign buzzed fitfully in the early light. Inside, Tony himself sat behind the counter, his Def Leppard shirt replaced by a Metallica one, reading the latest issue of Rolling Stone. He looked up as the bell chimed. "James, man, I haven't seen you since—" His eyes widened as he recognized Rachel. Oh man." "Tony," James said carefully, "we need your help. And your discretion." 20 minutes later, they had 3 complete sets of copies. Tony worked quickly, asking no questions, even as he copied photographs of his boss's boss engaged in clearly illegal activities. "You two be careful," he said as they left, refusing payment. "And hey, I never saw you, right?" Back in the Beetle, Rachel studied the copies. "We should split up, hide these in different places. I know a spot at the old drive-in." "No." James's voice was firm. "We stay together. Maxwell's guys are everywhere, and if something happened to you—" Rachel turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "James, after this is over—" She stopped, seeming to struggle with words for the first time since he'd met her. The moment was shattered by a sharp rap on the driver's window. They both jumped, turning to face Mike, James's supervisor, flanked by 2 of Maxwell's security men. "Out of the car," Mike ordered. "Both of you." Rachel gunned the engine instead, the Beetle's tires squealing as she pulled away from the curb. The security men ran for their car, but Rachel was already turning onto Main Street. "They'll follow us," she said, checking the rear-view mirror. "We need somewhere public, somewhere with witnesses." James had an idea. "The mall. It's opening in 20 minutes, Thursday morning aerobics class. The place will be full of people." "The mall? Are you crazy? That's the first place they'll look." "Exactly, but they won't expect us to go there. And—" James pulled out his keyring. "I still have access to every back room and service corridor. Plus, I know something they don't." Rachel glanced at him, a familiar spark of adventure in her eyes. "What's that?" "Remember when the mall was renovated in '82? They sealed off part of the old structure, a whole section of storage rooms and offices. It's not even on the current blueprints, but the old keys still work." She grinned, taking a sharp turn that sent them down a side street. "James Parker, you beautiful genius." The beautiful made his heart skip, but there wasn't time to dwell on it. The Mercedes was gaining in their mirror, its engine far more powerful than the Beetle's. They reached the mall just as the early crowd was arriving. Rachel parked between a minivan and a wood-paneled station wagon, the kind of cars that would make the yellow Beetle harder to spot. Inside, the mall was waking up. Early walkers did laps around the ground floor, their tracksuits bright splashes of color in the morning light. Music drifted from the fitness center, Olivia Newton-John's Physical, providing a rhythm for the aerobics class. James led them through the back corridors, past surprised maintenance workers and early arriving store employees. They reached a nondescript door marked Storage Authorized Personnel Only. "Through here," James said, fumbling with his keys. "Quick!" They slipped inside, just as voices echoed down the corridor. The room was dark and musty, filled with outdated store displays and mannequins in last decade's fashions. "This way." James took Rachel's hand, leading her through a maze of stored furniture and old signage. They emerged into what had once been a small office suite, now frozen in time circa 1982. Rachel looked around in amazement. "This is perfect. They'll never—" The sound of the storage room door opening cut her off. Footsteps echoed through the space, accompanied by the beam of a flashlight. James pulled Rachel into what had once been a manager's office, closing the door as quietly as possible. The space was tiny, forcing them close together in the darkness. "James," Rachel whispered, so close he could feel her breath on his cheek. "If we don't make it out of this—" "We will," he promised, but his voice was shaky. "No, listen." Her hands found his face in the darkness. These past few days, meeting you, it's been... The footsteps were getting closer. Any second now their pursuers would reach the office suite. "Rachel," James breathed, his heart hammering. "I think I'm—" The door burst open, flooding the tiny office with flashlight beams. The flashlight beams caught them frozen in the darkness, Rachel's hands still on James's face, their almost confession hanging in the stale air. But the voice that spoke wasn't Mike's or Maxwell's security. "Rachel, oh thank God!" Jenny from the county records office burst in, followed by Mr. Thompson himself. "Dad!" Rachel stepped forward, stunned. "How did you—" "Jenny called me," Mr. Thompson explained, his kind face lined with worry. "Said she saw Maxwell's men watching the records office when I couldn't reach you at home." He looked at James, recognition dawning. "You're the kid who used to buy those British imports." Before James could respond, more footsteps echoed through the storage area, heavy ones this time, purposeful. "Through here," Jenny whispered, leading them to a window that opened onto the mall's old delivery yard. "My car's right below." They climbed out just as Maxwell's men entered the office suite. Jenny's Honda Civic, with its peeling Wham sticker on the bumper, waited in the growing morning light. "The evidence," Rachel said suddenly, clutching her backpack. "We need to—" "Already done," Jenny cut in, starting the engine. "I've been making copies of everything that came through the records office for months, sent them to every newspaper within 100 miles last night." Mr. Thompson smiled grimly. "And I've been talking to the other store owners Maxwell forced out. They're all willing to testify now." As they pulled away from the mall, James saw Maxwell himself storming through the main entrance, his face contorted with rage. Above him, the mall's marquee board still displayed its cheerful message, "Summer Savings. Everything must go." Jenny drove them to the local newspaper office, where a frenzy of activity was already underway. Reporters crowded around their evidence. Photographers snapped pictures of the documents. And phones rang constantly as sister papers picked up the story. By noon, Maxwell's empire was crumbling. The FBI had been contacted, and news vans lined the street outside his office. The headline, "Mall Mogul's Corruption Empire Exposed," ran in a special edition, but James barely noticed any of it. He couldn't stop watching Rachel as she worked with the reporters, her face glowing with vindication as she told her father's story. She caught him staring once and smiled, that same smile that had first caught his attention in the darkened mall. Evening found them back at the drive-in, sitting on the hood of the yellow Beetle. The sunset painted the blank screen in shades of pink and gold, just like that first night that now felt like a lifetime ago. "Dad's not selling the house," Rachel said, breaking a comfortable silence. "Says he might even reopen the store, now that Maxwell's gone." James turned to look at her, hope rising in his chest. "So, you're staying?" Rachel met his eyes. The same song that had been playing in the tiny office, Spandau Ballet's True, drifted from the car's radio. "Turns out there's a good reason to," she said softly. This time, there were no interruptions, no security guards, no flashlights, no urgent mysteries to solve. When James finally kissed Rachel, it felt like the ending of every John Hughes movie he'd ever watched, perfect and inevitable, and somehow still surprising. They stayed there as stars appeared above the drive-in screen, talking about everything and nothing. Rachel confessed she'd first noticed him months ago, doing his rounds at the mall, looking serious and a little lonely. James admitted he'd kept every receipt from her father's store, each one marking a Friday afternoon that had helped him survive high school. "What happens now?" Rachel asked eventually, her head resting on his shoulder. James thought about it. The mall would change ownership. His security job was probably gone, and their quiet suburb would never be quite the same. But watching Rachel tap her feet to the radio's rhythm, wearing his jacket against the evening chill, he found he didn't care about any of that. "Now," he said, "we make a new mixtape." Rachel laughed, the sound carrying across the empty drive-in lot. She pulled him closer and whispered, "I already started one. Side A is everything that played while we were solving the mystery. Side B, that's for whatever comes next." The summer night wrapped around them, warm and full of possibility. From somewhere in town, the mall's lights would be coming on, but neither of them looked back to check. They had their own story now. one that had started with a security guard and a would-be vandal, but had become something else entirely. Above them, a shooting star streaked across the sky. In the distance, cars passed on Route 9, their radios playing the sounds of 1985, Madonna and Tears for Fears and Simple Minds. But in their own private world, surrounded by the ghosts of drive-in movies past, James and Rachel had found their perfect ending. Or maybe James thought as Rachel pulled him in for another kiss. It was just the beginning. Thank you for watching today's story. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed it, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel to relive the magic of the 80s every day with our heartfelt stories. May God bless you and your family. And don't forget to click on the video popping up on the screen right now. It's another totally rad story you won't want to miss. See you in the next video, and stay awesome.